So water covers 75% of planet Earth. You probably all learned that in elementary school. I know I did. Growing up in Minnesota, I was well acquainted with lakes, rivers, streams, even Lake Superior, which seems kind of like an ocean. But I did not see an ocean until I was a junior in high school, and my family took a trip to Florida. When I first encountered the ocean, it was with trepidation. I had heard stories of creatures that lived in the ocean depths. Jellyfish that sting, sharks that bite, the Leviathan, whatever that is. And wasn't Jonah swallowed by a really big fish? It was a very vulnerable thing to go into the water that is home to creatures that one knows nothing about. According to the United Nations Ocean Conference, the world's oceans contain somewhere between 500,000 and 10 million marine species. Okay, even people who study this for a living have no idea how many things are in that water. Between 500,000 and 10 million. It's quite a range. It was one thing to dip my toes in the water, but quite another to go deeper, where my feet could no longer touch the sand bottom. When I tried snorkeling years later, it was probably a good decade later that I worked up to snorkeling, I reached a new level of unease. Now I am supposed to breathe underwater while looking at sharp coral and sometimes scary, sometimes beautiful creatures. Has anybody else done the really labored breathing while snorkeling? You're like, okay. I imagine that people who grow up near the ocean, not in Minnesota, which, by the way, is about 40% of the world's population live within 60 miles of the ocean. So a lot of people live nearby the ocean. I imagine that those people are more comfortable with the sea and all its creatures. And perhaps they are, but from my experience, they still stand with awe and respect for the vastness and the mystery of the ocean depths. The writers of the Hebrew Scriptures lived near the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. And yet you find in our first reading for today and in our psalm an acknowledgement that God created the seas with boundaries. Thus far shall you come and no further, and here shall your proud waves be stopped. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they may not again cover the earth. The writers of the Scriptures understood that they needed the ocean to stay in its proper place. If it would violate that boundary in the form of a tsunami or, more contemporary, global sea rise, lives would be destroyed. Water has the ability to give us life and to take it away. The ocean was and is notoriously chaotic and unpredictable. Living in California for 14 years, I became more comfortable with the ocean. I love the sound of the waves, the rhythm that drowns out the other external noises and internal sounds as well. I think I could watch the waves on the ocean for a very long time and notice the birds that glide and how are they not getting caught by that wave and drowning? They get so close. I love that salty, organic smell that comes from the ocean. I was not alone in my craving for a trip to Half Moon Bay, which was the closest beach, as a break, a balm for the soul. In our gospel reading for today, Jesus invites the disciples to go into deeper waters. They are fishing on the Sea of Galilee, which is really a lake, Lake Tiberias. So it's not the ocean, but still, in order to go, it's a pretty big body of water, not as big as the Great Lakes. But in order for them to go deeper, they needed to travel away from shore. They needed to go further from the safety of land. And therefore, they needed a level of trust. In that deep water that they are invited into, they find abundance. So many fish that their nets threaten to break. Simon Peter falls on his knees in awe and wonder. Their encounter with the Holy One disrupts the status quo, and they are invited into the unknown as a life way of living and into the mystery of God. The first symbols of the early church were aquatic. Anybody know what they were? Two aquatic symbols of the early church. You know one of them. The fish. Yep. The fish was one of them. Does anybody have a guess at the other one? No? A boat. And you'll still see some churches that look like upside down boats. Right? So the fish and the boat. And these harken back to the disciples' previous careers as fishermen. And I think they can also speak to us today, living in a very fluid religious and spiritual world. We are creatures of the land. We like to have our feet on solid ground. I wonder if it has led us to neglect the vast ocean waters. Instead of digging deep in ourselves to find ways to reduce the use of plastic and other non-biodegradable products, we have dumped our waste into the ocean. Out of sight, out of mind, especially if you live in Minnesota. Meanwhile, the seabirds are getting tangled in our trash. And the whales are ingesting our plastic bags. And I don't know how many of you have seen the video, I don't know if I recommend it or not, of the sea turtle with the plastic straw up its nose. Ouch, right? Our concern and our influence are not limited to the land. I read this week that according, and this is again from the thing I quoted earlier, the United Nations Ocean Conference, according to some estimates, at the rate we are dumping items such as plastic bottles, bags, and cups after single use, by 2050, oceans will carry more plastic mass than fish. And an estimated 99% of seabirds will have ingested plastic. I keep thinking that if we accept Christ's invitation to go out into deeper waters, if we find a way to befriend the fluid, changing, vast, maybe even chaotic places in our lives, then maybe we will be closer to embracing the expansive ocean. Maybe then we will be motivated to protect sister water from our destructive ways and enjoy all those beautiful gifts of the sea for centuries to come. In the spirit of befriending the waves, we are going to listen to the ocean for a little bit as we close this out.